Oh, hello, hello. Welcome back to Dark Academia, Queen. Today, we're going to be talking about the origins of witches and warlocks. I love witches and warlock stories, really, really. And everything. Even love good Harry Potter, and I'm still a bit ticked off that is somehow managed to make it onto the banned books list. I'm like, seriously? We all know people reading it are like Karens and stuff who make this up, but seriously. But anyway, no, it's the Karens, Barbaras, and Marthas, maybe? Anyway, for those of you who are new here, please hit that like button, ring that bell for notification, and also please subscribe. So, we are currently on episode 44, nope, 45, my bad, of the origins of witches and warlocks. So, we know that early witches were people who practiced witchcraft. And what basically witchcraft is using magic spells, calling upon spirits to help bring about change. Most witches were taught to be pagans doing the devil's work. Many thought they were simply natural healers or so-called wise women whose choice of profession was misunderstood. So, it is unclearly when witches came onto the historical scene, but the earliest record is from the Bible, in the book of First Samuel, and thoughts to be written between 931 BC and 721 BC. And it tells the story of when King Saul saw a witch of Endor to summon a dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help defeat the Philistine army. Now, the witch roused Samuel, who then prophesied the death of Saul and one of his brothers, and to this day, according to the Bible, Saul's son died in the Bible, and Saul committed suicide. Now, here's the thing: I am a Christian. I'm also a believer in the supernatural. So, but do I believe witches exist? They could. I'm not ruling it out just yet. I'm very open-minded to a lot of superstitions and belief. But I'm personally, the most witches I know is like Sabrina the Teenage Witch. The most man would I love to have like a cat like Salem. Or Hocus Pocus Witches. That's my movie. And look, it's after the 4th of July, so this is Halloween for me. So this is all fair game. But anyway, but other Old Testament verses would condemn witches, such as the offside in Exodus 22:18. And additional Bible passages would caution against divination, chanting, or using witches to contact the dead. So, where did the witch hysteria come in? Which, by the way, if you go back to my Down the Rabbit Hole podcast, I talk a lot about some witches, urban legends from Alabama and Tennessee and West Virginia, even in just the U.S. in general, which you can go and check out as well. But witch hysteria really took place in Europe during the mid 1400s, and it was accused many witches confessed, and often under torture to a variety of wicked behaviors. Within a century, which witch hunts were common, and most of them were accused of being executed by burning the stake of hanging. Single women, widows, and other women of the margins of society were targeted. Now, between the years 1500 and 1660, up until 80,000 suspected witches were put to death in Europe. Around 80% of them were women thought to be in cahoots with the devil or filled with lust. Now, Germany had the highest witchcraft execution rate in Ireland and had the lowest. Now, the publications of the Malleus Maleficum was written by two well-respected German German. I lost my place. Oh yeah, German Dominicans in 1486, and they usually translate it as the Hammer of Witches, which was essentially a guide on how to identify, hunt, and interrogate witches. Now, Malleus Maleficum labeled witchcraft as heresy, and quickly became an authority for Protestants and Catholics, trying to flesh out the witches among them. Now, for more than 100 years, the books and more copies and books have accept the Bible. So, were witches really burned at the Salem during the Salem witch trials? I'm gonna say no. And here's my theory why. Because if you go back to my episode on the history of Salem, then you would know that the witch trials basically started out of teenage boredom and jealousy, um, and everything. But in January 1692, a group of young girls in Salem Village, Massachusetts, became consumed by disturbing fits, accompanied by seizures, violent contortions, and blood-curdling screams. The doctors would diagnose the children as being victims of black magic, and over the next several months, allegations of witchcraft would spread like a virus throughout a small Puritan settlement. So, a few have accused many have a few have, may have accused actual pedophiles of serial killers, but many were beggars, hermits, and recent immigrants who were tortured by confession. So, as the witch hysteria decreased in Europe, it grew in the New World, in which was reeling from the wars from the French and the British, a smallpox epidemic, and an ongoing fear of attacks from neighboring Native American tribes. And the tense atmosphere was ripe and for finding scapegoats. Probably the most known witch trials took place was in Salem. Now, the trials began when a 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris, 11-year-old Abigail Williams began suffering from fits. Or they were just being teenagers. Or just being kids for crying out loud. But anyway, today it is believed that they were poisoned by a fungus or caused spasms or delusions. Now, as many young people believe, women began to exhibit these symptoms, mass hysteria ensued, and 3 women were accused of witchcraft: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Topitiua. Now, I remember reading a play about this in high school and everything. But yeah. So here's the thing to remember. Massachusetts wasn't the first of the 13 colonies obsessed with witches. In Windsor, Connecticut, in 1847, Elsie Young was the first person in America executed for witchcraft, and before Connecticut's final trial took place in 1697, 46 people were accused of witchcraft in the state, and 11 people were put to death. In Virginia, people were less frantic about witches. In fact, the law in Norfolk in 1655, a law passed making it a crime to falsely accuse someone of witchcraft. Now, but this was still a concern, and although many people and dozens of trials took place in Virginia in 1626, none of the accused were executed. Now, you're probably wondering, are witches real? Well, my understanding, no. No, and here's the thing. Warlocks are like the equivalent to the female witches, so do we really have to go into separate contests on that? But I think witches get to more history of it because warlocks kind of have learned to lay under the weather, and history has always been prejudiced toward women in general, so this was their scapegoat, right? But as one of the most famous witches in Virginia is Grace Sherwood, whose neighbors allege that she killed the pigs and hexed the cotton, and others accused the following of shepherds. Now, the courts decided a controversial statement was to determine her guilt or innocence, that her arms and legs were bound and thrown into the water. But yeah. Now let's talk briefly about the warlock, which is a male practitioner of the witchcraft. So, the most commonly accepted derives from the warlock, from Old English, and it means breaker of oaths or deceiver. And the term came from especially the devil in the Round Thousand. Now, I think the first time I heard the term warlock, it would have been Halloween Town movies. You know what I'm talking about. And this term may have been associated with Scotland with male witches due to the fact that they had made pacts with Auld Arnie and had betrayed the Christian faith and broke the baptism vows. From this use, the word passed to the Romantic literature as, and ultimately, the baptism vows from the use in the word passed from the Romantic literature. So, although most victims of witch trials in modern early Scotland were women, some were actually executed as warlocks. Now, in his day, the Scottish mathematician John Napier was perceived as a warlock or a magician because of his interest in divination and the occult. Through this establishment and position has likely kept him from being prosecuted. So, do y'all believe in witches and warlocks? I'm very curious. Have you ever met a witch in